Born to Annoy, The Dawning of Awareness, Chapter 5, The Road to Perdition. The passing of my 7th birthday in July 1951, and life continued much as before. Despite the attractions of the countryside, I was still attending Moorside Junior School on a regular basis, although Sunday school was by now a long dead letter. Even at the end of the school holidays, I managed to put my impulses to one side and once more knuckled down to the routine of attending. I wouldn't say I was a good student, I'm certain I wasn't, but the fact is my memories of school life at that time are particularly sparse. It was the following spring when my life began to go downhill, and I only had myself to blame. I wasn't led astray by others. I began to truant with serious intent, and the more I did, the more I began to get into mischief. There are, no doubt, those with religious convictions who could well jump to a simple and rather obvious conclusion at this point. After all, I had cut myself off from the church and from the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth. I had taken a turn off the straight and narrow road onto a narrow, ill-defined and unsignposted track. In such circumstances, it was no wonder I was heading for trouble. For those with such simple and narrow minds and a belief in original sin, there is little to learn from my ongoing narrative, so I wish them well as they close the book. Looking back, there is one thing I am sure about, my actions at this point in my young life. They didn't come about because of any sense of unhappiness, or even frustration with my life in general, or those I lived it with in particular. I was a happy-go-lucky kind of kid, and my only problem with my relationship with Dad was that I didn't spend enough time with him. At the same time, I instinctively knew that his absence was not because he didn't want to spend time with me. He had to work, so both I and he could live. That was an inescapable fact of life. Moreover, I loved him, and knew he loved me in return. No, my actions did not proceed from unhappiness, but rather a strong urge to explore and learn about the world I inhabited. And for whatever reason, school did not seem able to fulfill that role in my particular case, and certainly not at that particular time. One instance in that year of 1952 comes immediately to my mind. I had managed to obtain a brand new bow and arrow from our friendly rag and bone man, and taken my station behind the caterpillar tree in our back garden. It was a Wednesday just before lunchtime, and I'd spotted a grey van travelling up Hollyoak Street. It looked like an armoured vehicle belonging to some unknown enemy. I scrambled over the low brick garden wall in time to ambush them and save the neighbourhood. It was only the van servicing the building site, but to me it was a moving target for my untested weapon, and it presented a challenge I could not resist. At precisely the right moment, I loosed my arrow, on the tip of which I placed a piece of carefully moulded clay to aid its steady flight, and, much to my great pleasure, the arrow hit the side of the van with a satisfying and most welcome clang. Much to my consternation, the van squealed to a halt, and 2 stormtroopers exited the vehicle at great speed and cursing in words I'd never heard before. I turned tail and ran for my life into the kitchen, slamming the door behind me and rushing upstairs to the toilet and safety. Luckily, I escaped their vengeful hands, but I needed a quick change of underpants before I could leave the house again. However, this was but a minor incident in my budding criminal career. I also embarked on a spree of minor theft, although with the best of intentions, no matter how misguided. I began to plunder the market gardens on the moss. It began with celery, for I knew it was one of Dad's favourites. The first time I brought some home for him, he surprised me by inquiring who it was from. "Mrs. Green," my devious mind whispered to me. "Mrs. Green, Dad." "Who's Mrs. Green?" "A lady I run errands for. She's got a bad leg." It tripped off the tongue as though it was true, and Dad swallowed it just as he eventually chewed and swallowed the celery, dipped in salt. Quite appropriate when I think about it. Celery was followed by lettuce, and lettuce by beetroot, and the mysterious Mrs. Green became looked upon by Dad as a Lady Bountiful, whom he was desirous of meeting. Unfortunately, before I could explain that she was very shy, I committed a major error by attempting a raid on our near neighbour's market garden. Arthur Gent spotted me in the act, and although I managed to escape over the railway line quick as a flash, he'd recognised me. Dad was not pleased when the formidable Arthur turned up on our doorstep, but little did he know. Much more trouble was to follow. Ironically, it turned out that Arthur's market garden had been plundered for weeks. It was just my luck to have been caught at my first attempt at food gathering on his land. I should have stuck to robbing Bill Sourbutt's. He was a pushover. Similar adventures followed. I wasn't learning a lot during this developing process, although my ability to run was proceeding well, and I was developing my talents as an imaginative storyteller. June was to prove the highlight, and this time I wasn't on my own. It began innocently enough. It was a Saturday, and I decided I should keep out of trouble. I set off down Hollyoak Street with the sole intention of visiting the railway station to undertake some train spotting. I didn't even go on the station, being content to cross the road bridge and then access the sloping path that led down to the station. From here, I waited patiently, and I was eventually rewarded with the sight of a tank engine pulling a long train of empty coal wagons. Just as it left in a shroud of steam and a clanking of wagons, one of my school chums approached me, and we began to walk off together towards Lund Mill. At some point he showed me a magnifying glass, holding my hand as if examining the furrows and lines in the skin of my palm, like some short-sighted gypsy fortune-teller. I suddenly noticed the way the sun's rays seemed concentrated in a small white circle, and then I felt the intense, searing, burning pain. He laughed aloud and began to run, me chasing after him, intent on doing him a serious mischief. Not only did I catch him, but I nicked his glass. Then it was his turn to chase me, but he didn't stand a chance. My legs might have been short, in keeping with my overall height, or rather lack of it, but I was as lean as a whippet and almost as fast. By this time I'd run off the pavement and found myself at the edge of a rubbish tip. I sat down waiting for my school chum to join me, in the meantime experimenting with his glass. I soon had a fire going amongst the dry grass, which quickly spread to some waste paper and old cardboard boxes. Then a sheet of rubberized cotton fabric caught fire, and so it spread. There were loads of rubberized materials about, and they smouldered and burned and gave off great black clouds of thick, vile-smelling smoke. Soon scores of boys had been spread over the tip, searching for useful objects or generally messing around, had joined us. Then we heard the sound of cavalry, or rather a clanging of bells as fire engines raced to the scene. At first the general instinct seemed to be to run, but the more spirited amongst us merely proceeded to higher ground to watch the fun. The sudden arrival of uniformed rozzers soon challenged that idea. All fled in various directions, dependent on where each lived. I found myself on the bank of the canal, heading towards Droylsden, and wondering how and when I could cross over its waters in order to obtain access to Moorside Street. At last I reached home, safe and sound, and undetected, determined to keep a low profile and lead a good and perhaps even a useful life for at least a couple of days. The police caught up with me a few nights later. I was subjected to a thorough interrogation in front of my dad. Naturally, I admitted I was present when the fire flared up, but denied any knowledge of how it had started. It was a very hot day, I pointed out. Could it have been caused by broken glass or something? After the police left, Dad seemed subdued and thoughtful. He told me to get ready for bed, and when he finally came upstairs to put my bedroom light out, his good-night sun didn't seem the same as normal. Although I didn't realise it at that time, Dad was under pressure and unsure what to do. The police and I were not the only ones testing him. My head teacher had written seeking information as to why I was missing so much school. The building sites had complained about my attack on their van, and there was the case of Arthur Gent. I, of course, thought I had pulled off another triumph, having undoubtedly taught my way out of yet one more difficult situation. It would be my 8th birthday the following week, and by then I could easily worm my way back into my dad's heart, and no doubt he would provide me with a nice surprise. The following Saturday lunchtime my surprise arrived. I knew something was afoot, because Dad hadn't gone into work that morning. The surprise took the form of Auntie Dolly, who, after some small talk with Dad, suddenly announced that Beatty and she were taking me in hand. Taking me in hand? The whole idea was of course a complete and utter nonsense. I was a free spirit, one of nature's wild young children. You couldn't take a free spirit in hand, could you? Alas, Dolly assured me that she and Beatty could, and what's more, that they would. Not only that, but she assured me it was for my own good. I couldn't see the truth of that at the time, although I'm now sure she was right. Either way, my days in Droylsden and with Dad were over for some time.